After the battle, Sarah woke up and she realized she wasn't dead. She had strongly believed that she was hit by one of the Covenant soldiers' weaponry, but in fact she wasn't dead. She believes now that the shock of being killed made her pass out, or lose, at least fall unconscious to the ground, as it only took on a few seconds to realize what had happened. She quickly looked around and offered the rest of her platoon to find them all killed. Apparently, she was the only survivor, and in her mind, if she knows that they had lost, that the whole team was gone. She was now strongly believed that the Covenant soldiers had won the battle, and it was unsafe for her to be there because at any moment the Covenant soldiers could find her, take her to board one of the ships, interrogate her, and even torture her for extract information. And but they didn't have too much information they needed, they probably would have executed her. So even in her mind, Sarah couldn't even stay there anymore. So she took some of her own weapon and some other animations that she found some of the surrounding soldiers that had been fallen in the battle, and she tried to find a way off the planet. Because even though with the limit animations she has, she would not stand a way against the Covenant soldiers, or not even against their cruisers or warships in the air in orbit. She tries to find at least one after their perhaps of one of the human ships they came with. And luckily enough, she found one that seems to be still functional, and she managed to activate the ship's engines. Because even though that she had realized that even that she leaves the orbit, at least to reach the orbit, she knows there is a big risk that either the Covenant Empire's warship in the orbit could detect her and immediately destroy her ship. But just as she about to leave the orbit, at least the surface, she programmed the computer to activate the slipstream drive just as she reached orbit. Just with one push of the button, and she would enter the slipstream just because she went off there from the planet's surface. Even that she knows it's a big risk. She could even be spotted by some of the enemy fighters. But it was a risk she had to take. Because all alone, with a small ship, she wouldn't stand even a single moment against the entire Covenant fleet. And she was right. As she leveled about in orbit, she was detected by two Covenant warships. But luckily though, she pushed the button and the ship entered slipstream space and she was gone. Even though the ship itself left this slipstream travel only only a few minutes later, but at that time she had at least traveled about 20 light years. She decided maybe it was time to to leave the slipstream to go and check the computers and even go through the ship's systems, just to see if there was any damage from while the ship was on the surface or when she was on the orbit. But the ship itself was functional, except the slipstream generator seems to have got some damage during the flight. She was able only to fly 20 light years, which when she decided to enter or to leave it, when she programmed to take her to the nearest human military outpost, it wouldn't work. But then she realized, it came to her mind just then, if the rest of the command would find out that the entire platoon on the planet which she was on was completely wiped out, they wouldn't send any other ships to find any survivors because she believes that even though that the command fast maybe the worst of survivors, they were probably taken as prisoners by the competent empire to torture to extract some any information valuable that for them they received valuable. So in her mind, she's probably already been declared killed in action. She had only one other option to do. She could try to find the nearest outpost. Even though herself without a slipstream generator, she only had one other option. Since the nearest was about several light years away, but for her, in its uneven at sublight travel, it would take her months, or perhaps even a year. And she realized the supplies of food and water she has on board would even last that long. Even when she would put in rations to only eat half of the food, or maybe even less than half. It still would only give her maybe a couple of more weeks, or maybe at least a few months of enough food and water. At last, when the food and water was gone, she would be starved to death until before even reaching the next planet. She tried to figure out if she could find or maybe repair the slipstream generator by herself. She looked at the computer to see exactly where the damage was and how severe the damage was. But unfortunately, even if she had the tools and some experience to repair it, it was damaged even beyond her repairs. Even though even if she would try to make some makeshift temporarily repairs, it wouldn't be in a 100% sure its accuracy or safety how long or even how long this temporarily fixed will hold. It could perhaps even work maybe for only one light year, or maybe it's only a half a light year rather than from the whole destination. But in her mind, it was not worth the risk. Because in her other part of her mind, it was a big risk that if she tried to make some temporary repairs to the generator, it could cause to make a backfire though, and it could cause the entire ship either explode at the start of activation, or the entire ship could be vaporized as the ship entered slipstream. In her mind, though, she didn't want to take any of those risks. Even though, despite that, she might be able to repair, do some damage, and maybe do some temporarily repairs. But she didn't want to take the risk of doing so. And she had only other few options. Wait, send out a distress signal for any broadcast telling them that she is a survivor of the battle of the planet where she came from, but knowing that it could take days, months to even receive that any of her human vessels could receive the signal, despite she may be only a few several light years away from the nearest planet. And during the battle, most of the warships wouldn't even wouldn't respond to her message. They probably would have continued to fight in the battles, or she in her message would also maybe is classified as an alien trick, which in her mind could also be a possibility. She had only one option: just starve to death after months of being in space. But then she found out she had only another option. And that was in fact she could spend suspended animation for next 3 years without have any food or water. And that was the problem. There was the problem with that. Because before she even considered doing that problem, to take that idea, she looked through the entire suspended animation system if to see if there was any damage to that system. But there wasn't. It was still 100% working condition. But then she wondered in which direction it should decided to travel. Should she decide to continue to the same destination and she had planned to go to the nearest planet which has strong human military presence, or maybe find some other planet which is maybe further away from the Confident Empire's territory, even though that the travel had to be in sunlight, even if it would take her months or perhaps even years to reach the next planet. But she decided to do so. She programmed the computer to spend her in suspended animation for the next 3 years, just in case if something would happen. So as she placed herself in, before she placed herself in the suspended animation when it's activated, closed herself, she looked at the sky, at the window in front of the cockpit, at the stars, before she closed her eyes and fell asleep. And the ship continued traveling on its way for 3 whole years. But during that particular time, though, just shortly before the third year had entered the ship's calendar, something did happen. A meteorite, at least on part of an asteroid, passed by the ship over just maybe only 7 feet above the ship, and part of the asteroid hit the ship, and that made some damage, including the suspended animation. And as the ship's time clock had reached the time when the pod was supposed to open and release Sarah from her slumber, never happened. The damage had even took that part out. So that meant she had to spend in the suspended animation like an eternity. And for the next several months after that, the supposed originally planned to be waken up from the computer, the ship was adrift in space. Not only did that part of the ship that is suspended animation had been taking part of damage, the engines had also been taken. That meant now no longer the ship was traveled in sunlight, now it was adrift in space, like forever. But only a few months after the ship was adrift, another ship approached. It was a human vessel, a science vessel. It was commanded by Dr. Catherine Halsey. She was looking for other. She was doing some scientific research in order to help the Spartan Second 2 program. When she encountered a small ship, first she believed that maybe it was an abandoned ship during a fight or something. But there has not been no records of any ships in this particular area for the past few years during the battle against the war against the Covenant. Then she realized, as she did scan the ship, it did actually detect when there was still functional life support on it. And the power part of the ship was still active. There were no other, since the ship didn't have any escape pods. So you wonder, could the ship have been abandoned by its previous occupants or something? But she managed to board the ship without a suit. But she did have a weapon with her, and she looked around to see if there was any signs of basically any of other who kind of left the ship and who used it. When she came across the suspended animation pod with one person inside, Sarah, she did immediately recognize her, or at least she recognized that she was a soldier within the army. And then she saw the pod was supposed to be open months ago, but it wasn't. According to what she believed, or at least figured out, the damage was beyond that she could even, that computer never opened it. But the vital signs of her was still perfect condition. She managed to open a pod and carried with Sarah back to her ship. And there, in this supposed sick bay, Sarah woke up, looked around, and wonders where she is. But then she recognized the sign of the sick bay to be a human, and realized she had been found. But at least wonder then came across her mind. Why is she waking up in a sick bay, not in the pod that was originally planned to? As she looked around and saw Dr. Catherine Halsey running around the corner in the room, she smiled at her and said that she was happy to see that she was awake. And according to Dr. Catherine, her vital signs were stable. She wasn't know any injury at all. Only maybe slight tired, but after that, nothing serious. Sarah demanded to know exactly when, what time it was, or at least what year. And it turned out she had been asleep for a whole 3 years, except for another couple of months, but she was originally planning to awake near his nearest planet. But it turned out that her ship's sublight engines had taken some damage and was adrift. Catherine told that she was on her had before she left the area, she destroyed Sarah's ship just in case if the Covenant Empire would have found it and may have found some database on the ship being find some any sort of intelligence or any information that they can use against the humans. And which Sarah didn't mind because the ship itself was just a small, shadow-like type of vessel. And since its damage was the slipstream was damaged in the sunlight, she would have been stuck there for eternity if Catherine had even found her. The rest of that time, Sarah explained that she was part of a battle of another planet 3 years ago, and that she and the rest of her platoon, at least the rest of the platoon, was wiped out by the Covenant Empire soldiers, and that she was the sole survivor. And even though when Sarah gave her full name to Catherine, and it turned out, sure enough, she was declared dead or at least killed in action. At least in the officially that's in her, but in public she had been declared missing in action. Despite that, now that she has been declared dead for 3 whole years, she had no point to go back to Earth, or at least Earth Command, to find out that she was in fact alive, but has been suspended on animation for a whole 3 years. And though Sarah wondered what would she do now, since Catherine was alone on her vessel, she explained maybe that she could maybe work for her as an assistant. And since that Sarah had more military training, and maybe that she could help her in order to find maybe good areas to be exploring like that, she explained that the war against Covenant had ended. Even though Sarah first didn't even want to believe it. But Catherine explained, and she even showed her official records showing that it was the truth. And Sarah explained she couldn't still even believe it. She had been a part of a battle, or a part of a platoon, fighting for the human race in order to stop the Covenant Empire. But now the war was over. And still the soldiers were still used in the end for humanity to make sure the peace, not only for them, but the rest of the galaxy. Catherine explained that she has been around the galaxy looking for other signs of ancient human occupations, technologies, or any sort of artifacts that was left behind, or even some technology left behind from the Forerunners. And even since then, Catherine and Sarah became partners, traveling around the galaxy, trying to find any signs of ancient human planets, colonies, or even perhaps any artifacts from that. In fact, they did find a couple of planets that contained some ancient human culture. But the most planets were in complete abandoned. But some actually were inhabited by other alien races. Some were less intelligent, others were just at the Stone Age level, or perhaps even at pre-industrial age. They learned a lot about the ancient human culture that was once once existed in the part galaxy for about 150,000 years ago, or almost a million years ago. But during their travels, Sarah and Catherine have become even closer and closer. At first, they were actually a little bit strangers to each other, but after they have got to know each other better, they started to open up more about themselves. Catherine had been teaching Sarah how to figure out where to go, when to, and even Sarah had trained Catherine in some more better self-defense with weapons or hand-to-hand combat, just in case if there was something we needed. But during their travels, they never encountered any sort of dangerous situations that could end up in their being killed. Only more daily basis life. But after a while, though, Catherine and Sarah had started falling in love with each other. And after having been traveling around for nearly another 4 years, 5 years, they decided maybe to take the next step. They had been traveling around in the galaxy to involve themselves. Sarah and Catherine had not been dating, and it didn't take long for them both to be committed or confessed their true feelings for each other. Sarah was happy to have found Catherine. But despite this, there were at least a couple of times when they both talked about their future together. They didn't know where to go or what to do next. Even though Catherine wanted to study more of ancient civilizations, and in fact, they managed to find a planet that in fact had some ancient human ruins, but also had a current colony, a small farming colony on it. So they decided, why not settle down there? At the same time, Catherine can study the ancient ruins and they can live on one planet together as a family, or at least as a couple. And even Catherine didn't mind that because it would give her a great opportunity to study some ancient human ruins, to learn more about the supposed ancient culture. She managed to at least figure out more studying some by studying this the ruins and perhaps even other artifacts was left behind. She managed to learn more about the ancient humans. But around the same time though, because just barely 2 years after they had moved on the planet, Sarah and Catherine had in fact got married. But there were parts of their marriage life they were missed. And that was in fact a family. They had actually got to know or a family who lived in the farming colony who had two daughters, one aged 10 and 12. But then one day, the parents passed away in an accident, leaving the both daughters orphaned. But since the family was very close friends with Catherine and Sarah, they had actually made them as their legal guardians if something would happen to their children. And after that, Sarah and Catherine adopted the both daughters as their own. Even though that they called them mothers or something, but they didn't mind that. But just after that, only about 2 years after they adopted their two children, Sarah and Catherine decided to adopt at least one more. And since there was an orphanage in town, which they adopted a boy, and both of them actually did have a great time. But they even not only spent time on their new planet or their new life form. It happened from time to time when Catherine and Sarah took their family on traveling around the galaxy to different planets to show them what's out there, the potential of new lives. But they always returned back to the colony to live the rest of their as a family. For Sarah, she was really happy that Catherine had found her ship. If she hadn't even found it, she may still have been in suspended animation, perhaps for years, or even more worse, forever. Catherine, though, she was really excited to have met Sarah. She was really happy to have met someone like her. very outspoken, very brave, and even skilled fighter, which came in handy from time to time when if you needed to protect Catherine or their future family. Their lives together as a family was something both Catherine and Sarah wanted to have. And that is how Sarah and Catherine found a true love got a big family together. The end.